Welcome to Spring LIB.
All right, so this question is kind of asking you to think about all of the options open to scientists to predict what the global temperature might be based off of more recent changes and also sort of historic patterns in temperature change, global climate change. Um, I've kind of made a list of some of them. These are like all mentioned in the multiple choice questions, and I think it's important because they're sort of scattered about in the options to go over each one and to just think about what they're used for and why they're used. So glaciers, first of all, scientists can look at. These are things that you can observe, like physically happening currently, are sizes of glaciers, locations of them, how fast they're melting, if the size is decreasing, if they're changing position because they might be moving due to like a lower weight overall. And these can be compared with photographs going back 100 or so years, and also records of glacier formation and also geological records of where glaciers were. That's how we know, for instance, the extent of them in the last ice age. So that's how like glaciers are used as sort of markers of global temperature. Same thing with water levels. A higher water level might indicate, an increase of like glaciers that have melted into the ocean, or like frozen ice and water that used to be frozen that isn't anymore, that has caused these levels to rise. And these are again things that can be viewed every year in like the present moment and recorded, and also compared to historic records about tides and shorelines and water levels themselves. Tree rings can also be used to sort of look deep into the past, to depending on like the age of the tree, obviously, to mark variations in temperature over the decades that this tree has existed, or centuries even. And so this is like another thing that's a mix of you know something you can sort of look at on a yearly basis. You might not be able to check back on a tree ring every month, considering it's already dead, but a younger tree that's cut will reveal the changes in the past few years, whereas an older tree might allow you to view patterns of change and to sort of estimate, how long it takes to temperatures to return back to an original point after they've increased a certain amount or something like that. Levels of greenhouse gases are things that can be measured, in the atmosphere, like now. And so that's another option. Obviously, greenhouse gases, the more that are in the atmosphere, the warmer the temperature is going to be. So they're a pretty good direct causal link that you can use to track climate change. Ice cores are another way that scientists can use, actually, like digging a core of ice out from, a very thick sheet of it that's, sometimes they can be, miles long and can actually have ice that was frozen thousands and thousands of years ago, that when you analyze like the oxygen levels in them and other things about them, that you can actually determine what the temperature was like. And these are good resources for looking at historic and ancestral prehistoric changes in the global climate. And that's very useful for sort of predicting, if it's possible to predict based on how fast the current climate change that we're in has been happening. So now that we have this understanding down, let's take a look at our options and see which one is sort of the most inclusive, or features things that would make the most sense for predicting Earth's temperature in the next 100 years. That's probably one of the key parts of this question is that it's only looking for the next 100 years, not next, 1,000 years or next 10 years. So option A, we have, dimensions and location of the glaciers, check, and water levels. So these are two big ones that can be observed sort of like day to day, but they don't really give us a lot of historic data that we can use. There is obviously some, but it's not like a tree ring. It's not like recorded in the thing itself. So how much that can be used for predictability as opposed to just like data taking and marking change as it's happening. Maybe, maybe not. Option B, you can look at dimensions, locations of glaciers, like water levels in bodies of water, and tree rings. That kind of hits all three, like sort of big things of like looking at things that are currently happening and also looking at historic changes to mark, the sort of statistics of how likely is it that this temperature is going to increase to this amount because the water levels are rising at this rate, etc. Option C tells us, you can look at the levels of greenhouse gases present in the current atmosphere. But how much does that tell you? How many greenhouse gases are going to be in the atmosphere in the future? How many were in like the past? How much is this going to change sort of in the next 100 years, and what effect that will have on the temperature itself? We're not getting a lot of predictability in just this data. And then option D has tree rings and ice cores. Now, like I said, these are good sources of historic changes in global temperature, but they don't give us sort of what's happening here and now that can be used to predict in the next 100 years. So because option B gives us both, observable tells of global climate and, global temperature, and a historic basis in the tree rings to have something to use, like have a model to use to predict changes in the future, I think it's safe to say we can go with B as our final answer.